My TED Talk today, Empathy, the Gateway Towards Understanding and Connection and Tolerance, will present how my Pedagogy of Love, my guidelines for course behaviors, and my assigned texts contribute to developing these three qualities in students taking my Women's and Gender Studies courses, a field I will now refer to as WGS. One crucial tenet of WGS courses in general is to develop student empathy towards others, especially those individuals who find themselves marginalized, perhaps because they are of a racial or ethnic minority, a transgendered person, or someone who is gender nonconforming. Since I became the director of WGS Fall 2016, I have taught our Intro to WGS every spring term, in which I articulate clear classroom values of how students will address each other and approach our course material. Honesty and integrity are among the core values I stress. Having clear classroom policies also allows students to understand who I am as a professor and how they need to comport themselves in class. Our first day together, I talk about my Pedagogy of Love, an approach to teaching that grew out of the love and care that reigned between student and professor, grieving the loss of fellow students and professors on account of the Virginia Tech massacre. It may sound corny, but I let my students know that I love them, that once they are my students, they will always be my students. This pedagogy is also explained as my genuine investment in their success and in the quality of their work. Two other policies contribute to establishing a culture of understanding as well. When students miss a class, I do not ask for a doctor's note to verify their absences are legitimate because I trust them. Their word suffices, so I underscore that their personal integrity is crucial to uphold. I also give them 2 grace absences, where there is no penalty for students not being in class. I understand that life happens, that they might need to miss my class to finish writing a paper that counts 50% of their final grade, that breaking up with a loved one interferes with their studies. My policy exists so students never feel they have to lie to me if they miss class. It is a way for them to remain honest. Over 3 decades of higher education teaching, I create shared values by explaining the reasoning behind my policies. Understanding that life happens is a way of showing empathy, an ability to grasp what my students are going through in their lives. The readings in my intro course equally cultivate empathy as well as tolerance. Students develop their ability to listen to divergent views and sensitive topics respectfully, and to hear others' stories with a non-judgmental mind. The first texts of the course establish guidelines for how to express their views in class. I thank my colleague, Christine Lebusky, for having shared these documents. The first concept of universal precautions represents a healthcare practice applied to a classroom setting. It refers to how a healthcare provider wears gloves with every patient they treat, and not just the ones that look like they might be contagious. It is a safety measure for all. In the classroom, it means we want to be considerate and phrase our ideas kindly so as not to insult or cause harm to others that hold that view. This is a safety measure to foster courtesy and inclusivity. Students take this to heart. Along the same vein, I provide students classroom guidelines to encourage a safe classroom. Among the 24 they read, I will highlight 6. 1, respect others' rights to hold opinions and beliefs that differ from your own. This sets the stage for differing views to be expressed and for the right of any student to hold such views when voiced kindly. 2, challenge and or criticize ideas rather than people. This practice allows us to examine where views or prejudices might originate without anyone in class feeling singled out or put on the spot. When applicable, support statements with evidence, facts. While opinions and beliefs do form our worldview, facts and academic statistics carry more weight when arguing a point. 4, be open to changing your mind and make room for others to do the same. Consider the possibility of unlearning things that you once believed to be true. I let them know that this can be a frightening process. Their commentaries and end-of-the-year evaluations often mention how their thinking has evolved over the semester and how they appreciated the range of topics that we discussed. 5, remember that everyone in class is still learning. Trust that everyone is doing the best they can and be generous with your assumptions about them. Along the same lines, 6, do not blame each other for the misinformation we have all learned or for the gaps in our knowledge. I am a firm believer that the best conversationalists are the best listeners. And hence, I encourage my students to listen carefully to their classmates, calling them by name and referring back to the idea they expressed before adding their point to the discussion. I want them to be aware that different communication styles also exist. We can express our ideas differently based on our backgrounds, culture of origin, and or current contexts. The end goal for putting into place these guidelines is to make everyone in class feel included and that they matter as a human being. They set the tone for productive conversations on highly controversial or highly politically thorny issues with a framework of respect, connection, and tolerance. My last point is how certain assigned texts encourage empathy. One way to foster understanding for marginalized groups is to assign readings they have authored. For example, when discussing trans studies, transgendered rights in individuals, students read texts authored by transgendered people. Here I thank Dr. Maggie Nanny, who exposed me to these articles students prepare. One text telling trans story beyond born in the wrong body introduces new narratives of how transgendered people view themselves and accept their bodies. My students enjoy the casual but poignant conversations among 4 transgendered friends. Tik Milan, a trans man with gender-affirming surgery, stated, quote, "The idea that being born in the wrong body seems to be the most commonly used and the most simplistic way of explaining the transgendered experience. But it never really fit my narrative. I never felt I was born in the wrong body. I just evolved away from it. End of quote. Nico Francesca, a gender variant queer fat femme, related that he felt a lot of pressure to abandon the parts of himself that were feminine in order to be masculine in an acceptable way. Lastly, Jacob Tobiah, a genderqueer femme, non-binary but a man bodily, expressed an endearing way to explain his trans experience. Quote, "When I was a kid, I didn't know the word trans or anything, and I didn't really feel like a boy or a girl, per se. I just had way too much gender. I just wanted to play with bugs and make cakes in my easy bake ovens and roll around in the mud in a tutu, all at the same time, you know?" Many Americans and non-Americans might not know any of these ways he and the others expressed growing up. My students respond to those frank testimonies with compassion. Their takeaway is that gender identity is much more complex and fluid than they first believed. I feel pride when repeatedly reading in student evaluations that they will continue to apply the lessons learned in class to life beyond the classroom when they meet new people and navigate relationships. To conclude, I wish to draw from two texts students read for our last day of class as they reinforce many of the values that I model and highlight all semester long. The authors of our textbook, Gendered Voices, Feminist Visions, mention as well how personal integrity matters. They advise students to figure out their own truths and priorities based on their own values and politics. In so doing, they will know where to put their energy and figure out which battles are worth fighting. They pose the question, is your right still a right if it violates our rights or hurts a community? They underscore how a peaceful and sustainable future is one that respects human dignity, celebrates difference and diversity, yet that diversity does not necessarily involve equality. Finally, Yvette Alex Eisensow talks about sacrificial love, which reflects very much my pedagogy and policies. She states that this kind of love, quote, calls on us to be more patient, kind, respectful, and truthful, as well as look for the best in other people and situations, end of quote. Over the semester, with my students, we achieve a classroom of love. For me and Alex Eisensow, love embraces the highest forms of truth-telling in the ways that involve empathy and inclusivity.